The court has ruled, the Supreme Court has ruled that demolishing homes is a form of punishment without due process is just not constitutional. The decision emphasizes the sanctity of legal procedures and the fundamental right to shelter. The Supreme Court Justice Gawai, highlighted that the executive must not override judicial roles. New guidelines stipulate notices and transparency in demolitions. How does the Supreme Court's decision actually impact so much? We've got a panel joining us at this stage. We've got Shadan Farasat, we've got Satya Mule as well. Vikas Singh will be with us in just a few moments, but first, this report.
The Supreme Court demolishes the so-called bulldozer justice being practiced across several states. The top court has made it clear that there can be no more instant justice with bulldozers demolishing houses of people alleged to be involved or accused of a crime. The Supreme Court, hearing a clutch of petitions against bulldozer actions, laid down stringent guidelines to be followed across the country before undertaking any demolitions. The court made it clear that heavens will not fall and mandated the following steps. Minimum 15 days notice should be given. Notice must be sent by registered post and pasted on outer portion of the house. If demolition is found necessary, reasons should be given as to whether full property or only part that is illegal to be razed. 15 days time each for appellate process, if any, as well as to remove illegal construction by affected parties themselves. Demolition to be videographed. Violation of guidelines will invite contempt, and officials will be liable to pay costs from their salary. A portal to be set up with these notices in 3 months, and the guidelines to be complied within a month. The Supreme Court came down heavily on the state and municipal authorities, saying the executive cannot become the judge and decide that a person accused is guilty and therefore punish him by demolishing his properties. This is a transgression of limits. As expected, the opposition welcomed the judgment.
I think the Supreme Court has today given its judgment, and this is actually showing the mirror as far as the BJP government, especially in Uttar Pradesh, is concerned. The arbitrary actions by officials, Mr. Yogi Adityanath, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, making a big deal about bulldozer justice. There is nothing called bulldozer justice. There is a constitution, there is a rule of law, and that is what will prevail in this country.
सुप्रीम कोर्ट का फैसला आया है सरकार के खिलाफ, उसका धन्यवाद देता हूं, बधाई देता हूं। कम से कम आज के बाद उनका बुलडोजर हमेशा हमेशा के लिए खड़ा हो जाएगा गैराज में। अब किसी गरीब का घर नहीं टूटेगा।
उनका भी अपना अधिकार अपने हिसाब से ठीक है और सरकार जो कर रही है वो भी ठीक है।
Affirming that the right to shelter is a fundamental right, the Supreme Court said the demolition of shelters is unconstitutional. The focus now shifts to the implementation of the new guidelines.
Well, joining us now, Mr. Vikas Singh, former Additional Solicitor General of India and former President of the Supreme Court Bar Association. Thanks, Mr. Singh, very much for being with us. So this is an important verdict by the Supreme Court. The court has ruled that demolishing homes is a form of punishment without due process is not constitutional. How does the Supreme Court's decision on bulldozer justice impact the balance of power between the judiciary and the executive in the country?
So, Vishnu, there was a very disturbing, news item coming up quite regularly that whenever there is some accused, who's on the run and who's not being able to nabbed by the authorities, they used to go and demolish his house as a sort of a punishment to ensure that he will surrender or come to the law. Now, this was something very disturbing because this used to happen every time they wanted to take some action against an accused. What probably the petitioners should have highlighted was that these are cases, so there are, even in Delhi, there are several unauthorized colonies. Unauthorized colonies are there, which probably notices are given and, time is also given, but no demolition takes place because of political reasons. Now, technically, the entire colony may be unauthorized. So technically, all of them were up for demolition. But when somebody living there is accused of a particular crime, then they single out and demolish his house.
Right.
without taking action against the entire colony. So that is probably what the state was doing, and probably this is not highlighted by the petitioners. But I think the judgment covers this eventuality also, because the judgment says that whenever you want to go for with a bulldozer, you have to give this notice, you have to give this time, you have to give him time to relocate. And probably this judgment may have to also follow later on with another clarification that if the entire colony is up for demolition, then you can't single out somebody and
No, you
demolish
made an
somebody.
important point. And, you know, the court, and I was just reading the order itself, the court made it clear that these directions do not impact action against illegal buildings or structures on roads, on riverbanks, etc., etc. But what you're saying, Mr. Singh, is that that's easier said than done in a sense, because if there is an illegal home, then as per this judgment, there is a process of appeal which can now be initiated, and a municipality which is well within its rights to demolish that structure cannot do so as easily. So there is a possibility of this being misused. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. So supposing you take the action of giving notice, etc., and there are, say, 10 houses in a row which need to be demolished, and you don't demolish any one of them. And then when suddenly one of the occupants of those 10 houses is accused of a crime, you go and demolish his house selectively, and you take a stand in court that, well, this was a case for demolition, the notices had gone, but we have decided to demolish him suddenly today. Now that is what is something which should not be permitted,
Right.
because if all the 10 houses were illegal, then all of them should be demolished at one go. You can't single out the house of a criminal or somebody who's in conflict with crime and you go and demolish his house and leave the rest. And that is why the Supreme Court also emphasizes on the concept of the rule of law, and says that you can't, the executive can't take the law into its own hands. And now with this judgment, now at least there will never be an overnight. So supposing if a notices have gone to somebody or a colony or a group of houses, say 6 months back, when you go with the demolition, plan the demolition action, you will have to give notice again, and probably also demolish all the other houses and not single out anybody, but in particular in the area where they are authorized colonies. And rightly so, Supreme Court has singled out, or kept apart the constructions on roads, etc., because those are on a different, public land occupation is something which has to be
Right.
dealt with.
But let's talk
more.
a little bit about bulldozer justice in the sense of, in the context in which it was used. And this is a quote from the Supreme Court. "It is not a happy sight to see women, children, and aged persons dragged to the streets overnight. Heavens would not fall on the authorities if they hold their hands for some period." Does this statement indicate that the Supreme Court felt that the actions in certain states were vindictive, and that there needs to be a process of appeal, and then perhaps even more appeal, before any municipality or state government or any authority goes and breaks down a structure? Right?
Absolutely. So when you have, supposing, given somebody a notice earlier and not taken any demolition action or not asked somebody to vacate, and you want to do a demolition now, you have to give a notice again and say that this is 15 days time, either you vacate, and that time will also be used by that person if there is a legal redress for him or her to go to court and get a stay on the demolition action. So obviously now this kind of arbitrary action or this kind of executive action of suddenly taking the law into your own hands will have to stop now. And the moment this were to happen again, this will amount to firstly contempt, and secondly the Supreme Court has also said that officers who are responsible for taking such demolition action, they should also be proceeded against with. So it will be not so easy for somebody to do it and get away with it, because using this judgment, they can also face departmental action or even criminal action or even contempt of court proceedings for having violated the orders of the Supreme Court. So I think it's a very, very salutary judgment. It's a emphasis on, the right to shelter. Right to shelter cannot be taken away so, brazenly and in a manner which militates against human rights, as well as, giving sufficient time for the family to find for alternative accommodation and move to an alternative place. take care of your belongings, because in this demolition action, invariably your house, your personal belongings, your movables, all got completely destroyed
Sure.
because of this overnight action. Now this will have to stop, and this is something which is completely against the rule of law, against the basic tenets of the established principles that we have all stood by and this country stands by. So I think it's a very, very a judgment which is very good for this kind of state
Sure.
action, arbitrary action by the state.
Mr. Singh, thanks very much for being with us. I'm joined at this stage by Shadhan Farasat, an advocate in the Supreme Court, and Satya Mule, also an advocate in the Supreme Court. Shadhan, let me come to you first. Does the ruling address the issue of targeting specific communities with demolitions? That's principally what a lot has been spoken about, written about, and frankly witnessed as well.
No, it does. It does address it in the sense that it does point out that if you are, let me just step back from the question. And let's give a framework, and then I'll answer that question of yours.
Sure.
So normally, municipal authorities can, with whatever notices, etc., which are required under the respective municipal acts, issue that, follow the due process, and if there is an unauthorized construction on public land or without permission, whatever it may be, as per the regulation, demolish that relevant part after following the due process, right? That's always been the law. Different municipal laws in different states exist. Broadly, they are similar in terms of notice requirements and, some kind of a natural justice, that person should be heard, etc. Now, that's not been the problem historically, right? What was happening was that law was being misused or weaponized as a retributive penalty for some other crime, right? So somebody may have done something else and the state wants to be macho and show to the entire, their support base that, listen, I actually set out these bunch of people, these either criminals or this community which is problematic, and I'll set them right with my big bulldozer going. And this was basically a play of macho politics, right? Hyper masculine politics, which came to be played in a few states. Now, what was happening was that this was being misused, the municipal laws, to actually penalize somebody for a crime which is being alleged, which is yet to be adjudicated, in which only an FIR may have been registered, which the person may eventually be found to be completely innocent. Now, this was, of course, completely a violation of the rule of law. This was not permissible because this was being used for an ulterior purpose, not for the purpose originally intended. This was being used as a punishment. And it is there that the Supreme Court has identified this very rightly for what it was being used for and said, boss, you can't use it for this purpose. And in that context, it has given a set of guidelines, which I think are quite detailed and quite welcome. And they should hopefully be able to prevent such kind of penal retributive action of demolition as a penalty for targeting a group community as a response to an alleged crime. So that's what has effectively happened. And I think it does have very good guidelines. However, I think there has been an experience, and I'll flag this, that in 2017-18, there was a judgment in Tehseen Poonawalla on hate speech. And there also the guidelines were very detailed, reasonably comprehensive. But I think the compliance of those guidelines thereafter has been patchy. And I think, therefore, it's important that if any of the states tries to override the Supreme Court order, it's important for the court to show that they are going to ensure implementation of the order. Even one or two good examples right in the beginning, if any state tries to overreach, will be good enough. You send the chief secretary in a contempt behind bars for 2 days, and I can assure to you that in the entire country, not a single bureaucrat is going to do anything like that. Or you take the money out of the personal, this thing for demolition from one of the, like it has indicated in the judgment, from one of the officials who have carried it out, from the salary of 2 months or 3 months of an official.
Sure.
And I can guarantee to you that in the country, in the entire country, not one official, despite the political bosses telling them to do it, will refuse to do it.
Okay, so then hold on for a moment. Satya Mule with us
I think
as
it's
well.
important to implement it.
Got it. Mr. Mule, considering the Supreme Court's ruling, what are the bigger societal implications in terms of law enforcement, especially in terms of punitive actions against crimes without judicial oversight? In other words, what's the bigger picture over here?
Well, the bigger picture, and first and foremost, we have to welcome the guidelines that Supreme Court has sent. Of course, it is in good faith and taking care of the victims. They are, victims because a rule of law or due process or principles of natural justice have not been followed. But this is not the case with all such situations. There are various examples that, for example, certain premises are used for terrorism activities. There are premises used for other activities such as storage of drugs and so on and so forth. And all these constructions are, illegal. They are without permission. And what has happened is there is a certain sense of emergency which the state machinery feels, and therefore there is a need for urgent and emergency action. In such cases, the notice and the time period and the appeal and all those things can work contradictory to the intentions of the state to preserve national harmony, social harmony, and also various other angles which are positively in the interest of the nation or the state. What happens is this particular directives are one-sided. Of course, no doubt, it is with due respect to the Supreme Court, this is taking care of the right to shelter. But one has to understand that not everywhere in this country Mr. Yogi Adityanath exists, or not everywhere this kind of situation arises that the bulldozer kind of action is taken care to deliver macho kind of action or instant justice. So what happens is, even in the Constitution of India, we have provisions. We cannot overlook those. And the provisions are taking care of national interest, state harmony, social interest, social harmony, and so on and so forth. If there are premises which are being used to fund or to use for activities which are against the nation's interest, then I don't think appeal and all these things will be served. And in this particular directive, there is no other directive or some ventilation given to the state to implement these kind of actions, under various other laws. And there is one more important thing that I want to highlight is that this appeal mechanism doesn't oust the jurisdiction of the writ courts. So what happens is, after the appeal, these people will go to High Court, then they will go to Supreme Court. So what happens is, the entire objective of eliminating this kind of illegal structures or structure which are a nuisance or against the state interest can remain there and cripple
I
the
think
state.
Those are important points.
Cripple the state.
Shraddhan, I think there are two aspects of this debate. Obviously, the manner in which these bulldozer justice was being implemented in this country. The fact this was instant justice targeting a certain group of people in particular states. And I think the larger point that Mr. Mule raises is important. That there are illegal structures, there are illegal colonies, there are people, and there is a process which has been implemented and just the demolition remains. This might slow down that. So, would you agree that there are two ways of looking at this? People will not be targeted who are unfairly being targeted, but perhaps illegal structures wherever would be allowed to exist for longer than they should be allowed.
See, my sense is that with any change, this is the kind of apprehension which is natural to be there, right? When any protective mechanism is put in place, there will be obviously an apprehension that it can be misused or overused. I think what my fellow commentator is saying, that it can be overused in circumstances it is not meant to be used, correct? Now, my sense is, I think state in India, states as in state as an entity and different state authorities, they know, and I have with my own experience, I can say they know exactly that when they have to use a law which is in a certain way, which is meant for it, they can use it. I don't think this is going to prevent genuine state action, right? Of removal of genuine unauthorized things which are required for a certain purpose. I don't think it's going to really stop that. But even in those circumstances, there are considerations which are, which outweigh a whole lot of immediate action. For instance, Delhi, for instance, we and you, Vishnu, live in Delhi, right? Now, only 30 to 40% of Delhi lives in authorized colonies or which have sale deeds. 60% of Delhi, the entire working class, all our staff in our house, in our offices, they all work in unauthorized colonies. Now, so the political class this thing has protected them by passing those enactments by saying you can't remove it unauthorized, because there's a real human reality there.
Yes.
I mean, it's beyond the law. Can you 60% of Delhi, can you evacuate them tomorrow? They live in unauthorized colonies. You of course can't. They are doing the day and day, the entire working class of Delhi lives in that. So the point is that even in a non-misuse situation, the state is very conscious that there is a genuine problem. They are not able to solve it. Therefore, they have to go ahead with it. So I think let's see how it plays out. My worry is not so much that it will be overused. My worry is that the states which have been recalcitrant in the past will try to override and overreach these guidelines and try to continue doing what they have done in the past.
All right, well, let's hope that doesn't happen, because this order seems to be absolutely clear. One of the things mentioned by the judge or the judges is that if there is a building which is demolished, then the person who's ordered the demolition pays to bring it up. So, I mean, I don't know if that can be easily implemented or not, but that is something that's been mentioned. I'd like to thank you both very much for joining us on this program.